For me, he's the foremost constitutional scholar anywhere.
Almost any lawyer who is who in East Africa was taught by Yash.
Yash is a very humble, affable person who's always ready and willing to share his knowledge.
Well, I was born in Ruiru, just outside Nairobi. At that time, it seemed a long distance. And my father had, grandfather and father had a shop in Ruiru. So my childhood was spent in Ruiru, a beautiful village in those days. When I grew to a school-going age, I had to come to Nairobi because there was no school. At that time, schools were, of course, divided by Indians, Europeans, Africans. But there was a school in Nairobi, Indian primary school. So I came to live in Nairobi with my grandmother. They had a house here. So I did my studies in what was then the government Indian primary school, then government Indian high school. When I finished my studies here, I wanted to do graduate studies. And at that time there wasn't there were, of course, a university of East Africa, but they didn't have law, which is what one of the things I wanted to do. And the reason they had no law was that Europeans didn't want the black people, as I said, to be lawyers. But there were hardly any African lawyer, more Indians or Europeans. So there was no faculty. And so I applied to Oxford, and they did exams as they do normally, so I got admitted. So then I spent 3 years of study in Oxford, and I got good grades. And then I was doing a special year at Harvard Law School. This chap who came to see me, his name is William Twining, whose father had been at one point governor of Tanzania. I suppose he was recruiting lawyers, teachers. So he said, why don't you come home, and we need teachers. Some discussion, and then my thinking, well, that will mean a very different career if I do that. Do I want to give up a career as one of the leading lawyers? Well, that's very arrogant of me, but one of the leading lawyers in London, where everybody was, wanted to go, or go to this little place, start teaching, not much books and so on. Anyway, William Twining persuaded me that I should go to Dar es Salaam, have 5 countries. They have been discriminated against. We must now do what we can to balance things. So I went, and then I was there for about 10 years nearly.
Almost any lawyer who is who in East Africa was taught, by Yash. We are talking of judges, advocates, politicians who Yash taught in Dar es Salaam. Met Yash Ghai as a student when I went to study law in Dar es Salaam. When I was in my second year doing administrative law, which was 69-70. He was the dean of the law school, in Dar es Salaam.
I used to meet with the Vice Chancellor of Nairobi, with the Registrar, and so on. And each time we met, they said, "Why don't you come home? Why don't you come home? The community is breaking up. Come." So eventually I gave in. I mean, they had the usual way, interviews and so on. And London decided, because you're still part of London University, on the basis of interviews and so on, I was awarded and approved in London. The day before, I was supposed to leave Dar es Salaam, having done my duty, and I was called. A former student of mine rang me and said, "Don't come to Kenya. Something might happen to you. Don't come." And these were two students of mine who separately rang me, and I'd packed everything. I was almost about to go to the airport. And then, another few minutes, get another call from the registrar of the University College of Nairobi. And he said, "We have cancelled your contract." I said, "You can't do that. It's a long process, lot of interviews, lot of candidates, and now you tell me you have cancelled it. On what basis?" "Oh, I can't tell you, I can't tell you. I'll tell you one day, I can't tell you."
We kept close ties, with him, discussing, Kenyan issues, and that's how I knew that at some point he was going to be Dean of the Faculty of Law in Nairobi. But, Charles Njonjo and others, stopped it because they thought he was very radical. And he had written this book in '69, which was critical of Kenya's constitution and, public law generally.
And I now think back often and I say, why didn't I tell Jomo Kenyatta that I am being treated like that? The reason for Jomo Kenyatta is that I told you I was born in Ruiru. My father had a shop there, and Jomo was one of his clients and friends. My father and he had become quite good friends. Anyway, the result was that I left East Africa, and for very many years, because people kept on saying, "Don't come, don't come." Though I suppose after a number of years I probably could have come. But there was so much nastiness in this country then. People were being killed, people were being imprisoned for nothing. So I did come for a long period, and then I developed a whole new career. Fortunately, I had by that time some teaching experience. I had degrees. I had comparative law work. So I taught in a number of countries, and until I came back when I was asked to help with making a constitution.
My introduction of Professor Ghai was just through public information, one as a law professor, and just initially just reading the books he had written, so mostly as a scholar. Then of course when he got involved in the Kenyan constitution making process back in 1999, I think, obviously as a person who had an interest in constitution and who had been involved previously in some of the campaigns on constitutional change, I followed his career very, very closely. And then obviously I ended up having the privilege to work with him and for him. And there's no doubt in my mind that for me he's the foremost constitutional scholar anywhere. and especially when it comes to constitutional design and transformative constitutional design. And by that I mean transformative constitutional design where the people are at the center of the constitution making, so that at the end of the day you end up with a document that is people-centered, people-driven, as opposed to institutional, political, or leadership-driven.
Of Professor Yash. Even way back when I was doing my law degree at the University of Nairobi, because of his writings, we would use that a lot for our studies. So I always heard of him, and of course, being in university at the time when the Constitution of Kenya review process was going on, I followed the happenings and goings on at the Bomas and in the media and through the print media, and so I knew about Professor Yash and his work, in giving Kenya this new 2010 constitution. And then after that, in 2014 is when I came in to Katiba Institute, then as a litigation, a litigation advocate. And from there, of course, I just got to learn about the particular passion that Yash and Jill, and therefore Waikwa, who started the organizations, had for human rights and constitutional law and rule of law in Kenya, in the way we would prepare for our cases, making the decision of which cases to participate in, which advocacy campaigns to join, which initiatives to support. And of course, this particular passion of reaching the ordinary mwananchi out there, and not only the people within, Nairobi particularly. And so his initiatives to reach out and work with grassroots organizations, community-based organizations, because those are the kind of people we really need to reach to, because they might not have access to other modes of getting information as people in Nairobi have.
But the first time I ever came to Kilifi was to go to a meeting, a really large meeting, inland. We drove from around here for a couple of hours, I think, to get to a meeting where there were 600 people very enthusiastic about the whole process of the Constitution and making their contributions. So in that sense, I was watching the process, learning a lot about constitution making, learning a lot about Kenya, which I'd only ever visited once before this process began, reading the documents, of course learning a lot by attending meetings, sometimes doing a little bit of research. As I say, I was a sort of spectator, except that the events were very close.
When he was asked by the government to be the chair of the CKRC, the first person he came to was me, and I drove him around, introduced him to Akina Mutava Musimi and all those groups, because there were two parallel processes then. One that was led by Raila Odinga, and the other one that was the Ufungamano one, which was chaired by the late Oko Mbaka. So Yash Ghai was able to, bring the two together, and that's how you had a united front to the Bomas draft.
I traveled, as you know, not all of us traveled, the commission, around the country, talking to people, listening to them. First time we went quick tour, saying who we were, why we had come, what we were doing, and saying, okay, now you have 2-3 months, we are going to come back. But this time, I don't talk, you talk. You tell us what kind of constitution you want. And that worked. We did that, and they worked. They had a lot of ideas. And one of my important tasks was to persuade them not to be afraid of Moi. I said, don't worry, he's on his way out. Very quietly, of course. And some trusted me and became quiet. Others were still a bit And then I could see that they were, when I go to a meeting in a country hall or some stadium, the local commissioner comes, the police commissioner comes, and then in the beginning, not many people would say anything. You might have even 200 sitting there. And then I began to worry. I mean, I had told them we were going to come and talk to them. So then one day everybody had left, so I stayed, and there were 8, 9 of them talking. So I said, tell me, why are you people not telling us what you want? I can't do much, and this is publicized that you said this. And I know you are not happy with the system. Why haven't you told me? And one of them said, the damn police inspector, you bring him in, and you expect us to say anything? I learned a lot from that. And so I told, then I told the local areas and the police inspector and others, please do not, I'll come, and when I come to your town, I'll greet you, I'll bring you a cup of coffee, then you leave me alone. Leave us alone, because there were other commissioners too. And because, I told them, because they feel a bit diffident. And but I will, of course, you also have your views, but please leave us alone. And they did. I mean, well, they had to, because I was in charge of the process. So then I could see people were coming out with ideas, with proposals, and that became a very important source of our product. Because I didn't want to do it as a show. I wanted to show that we respected them.
There are people who may say the 2010 constitution was not, Yash Ghai's constitution was not the bombers' constitution. It was, some people may say it was committee of experts, but I would say 85 to 90% of the 2010 constitution was the work that was done by CKRC, read by Professor Ghai. And significantly, the parts that may not be owned by CKRC and Yash are those that had to be negotiated very late on, so that politicians and some sort of fundamentalist sectors of the society could support the constitution. So in a way, the sections that watered down the initial constitution would constitute the 10 or 15%. But largely, if you look at the CKRC model. But for me, it's not the percentages. I think for me, it's the philosophy that our constitution is anchored on. That philosophy is the CKRC, Bomas, and Yash philosophy. The transformative, people-centered, a human rights-based approach, value-based constitution. That came from Bomas and from Yash Ghai.
When we started working closer together is when I invited him to come to Mathare to participate in our first strategic thinking with Jill on establishing of Mathare Social Justice Center. So he came to Mathare, we discussed, and even he contributed on how we can strengthen grassroots work with the human rights movement. And then Mathare Social Justice Center, we started doing the campaign. Later, we told him we had a problem. We didn't have an office. We needed somewhere to do documentation. Yes, in his simple way, yes, what do you need? He told me we needed just one room to be documenting statement for victim of police brutality and extrajudicial killing. And Yash offered to pay us a small office where we are in Mathare number 10. That small office, since 2016, Yash has been paying us that small office. And that's the major contribution. Because if he didn't come to help us that time, I think we would not have taken off.
Katiba Institute was essentially a brainchild of Yash, and with the support of Willie Mutunga. Because at the time when the idea emerged, Willie was actually not Chief Justice. This was before the new constitution, when he was with the Ford Foundation. And he said, I think Yash spoke to him and said, I'm afraid that when the new constitution, if and when a new constitution comes to be, it may face opposition from the political class. And so they discussed the ways in which you might resist this, and in setting up an organization which was devoted to supporting the constitution.
I was at the Ford Foundation basically, and when you are a donor, you fund ideas. And it was very, very clear to me that, Yash was right in forming it, because we knew that the struggle, constitution-making struggles continue after promulgation. They don't end, because those who lost in the referendum will come together and they start, now subverting. And what we've seen is basically the parliament trying to claw back the gains that were made. So having an institution that will run to court and say this legislation is unconstitutional was important. And it's a pity that Katiba hasn't received a lot of support from Kenyans in terms of, giving money. And I hope with the new civil society resurrection, as I said, as those who are in politics get money from the people, then these organizations should also go to the people and basically say, we've done this. And we make sure that the social movements don't just come to Katiba to be helped. They also need to help the institution and own it.
I think the idea of Katiba Institute goes back, way back during the first constitution-making process that is under the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission that Professor Ghai was chairing. There was a feeling apparently at the time, and Yash is the best person to speak about this, that when the constitution, a new constitution comes into place, there will be need for very robust civil society organizations that can be able to defend the constitution, help make people understand what the constitution is about, help people who will be charged with implementation to understand the different aspects. And so there was an idea that there's more that needed to be done even at the civil society level to be able to implement a transformative constitution. So what, but obviously with the CKRC process not succeeding after and especially after the fallout between the CKRC and the government introducing sort of a different constitution from what people had agreed at the Bomas, and that constitution introduced by government being defeated in 2005 at the referendum. So that idea sort of just wasn't going anywhere because there was no new constitution. But then in 2010, when the new constitution passed, I think again people who had thought about this, specifically Professor Ghai and to some extent Dr. Willie Mutunga, started, I think, wondering whether there was a need to go back to the idea. And then at the time, immediately after the passage of the constitution, they spoke to me and sort of wanted to know whether if we were to start something like Katiba Institute, I would be interested in helping sort of manage the administrative aspects, the setting up and just getting it going. And so that's how the idea got concretized. At the time I was living and practicing law in Canada, so I moved back to be able to start the institute.
So Katiba Institute was formed in 2011. At that time, it had 3 directors. The 2 co-founders, that is Yash and Jill, and then the executive director at the time was Waekwa Wanyoike. Then in 2012, it's when it was formally registered. So it's a non-governmental, non-profit organization. And the key role or the key mandate of Katiba Institute is to ensure entrenchment of constitutionalism in Kenya by full implementation of the 2010 Constitution. So that's the key goal and the key mandate of Katiba Institute. So there are different ways or different strategies we use to ensure we achieve that implementation. So we do activities such as outreach, mobilization, education, public interest litigation, scrutiny of laws and policy, and then we also have working together with other institutions that have a mandate to carry out certain constitutional rules under the Constitution, like the judiciary, independent commissions, and so on. Right off, when people think of Katiba Institute, I think the first thing that pops into their mind is public interest litigation. And public interest litigation is one of the key strategies or tools we use to defend and ensure full implementation of the Constitution. This is because the 2010 Constitution, unlike the 1969 Constitution, allows any person who feels that the Constitution is under threat or has been violated, or a person's human rights under threat of violation or have been violated, can go to court to ensure compliance and redress over any violation of human rights. So because of that, it is a really good and critical tool we've been using in the past 7 years to ensure implementation and defense of the Constitution. We've done over 100 cases, and they have been critical cases we've done or participated in varying capacities. Some we've been the core parties who've gone to court, some as amicus curiae. Amicus curiae is a friend of the court, and some as an interested party. An interested party is someone who's not a core or primary party to a case, but also has a significant interest in the case. So we've participated in all these 3 different capacities in all of these cases, and we've had notable or groundbreaking cases around environmental justice and environmental protection. For example, litigation regarding the first proposed coal plant in Kenya that was to be constructed in Lamu Kwasasi. We had a really groundbreaking judgment around public participation and involvement of citizens in projects that are going to affect them. And it also in regards to LAPSET, especially around Lamu and the threat of breach and violation of the rights of the Lamu people. So we had a really groundbreaking judgment on, the rights of persons who will be impacted by a project, infrastructural project, and also the rights of indigenous persons and protection of traditional knowledge and skills. So those have been really good judgments that have come out of the courts. We've had judgments on leadership and integrity. We've had notable judgments on recall of your elected official for failing to live up to the mandate upon which, or to live up to the premise upon which they were elected. We've done cases on the election laws, trying to open and also to strengthen the integrity of the electoral process to ensure free and fair elections in Kenya. We have done cases on, good governance through requests for information, and when the information that was sought was not disclosed, we've gone to court to force the disclosure of that information, and all because we want to ensure we have an open government that is accountable and transparent to the people. We've had cases, notable cases on the right to association of minorities. For example, political minorities, people who are espousing a view that the majority is not espousing, sexual minorities, indigenous persons, and other marginalized persons. We've gone to court on issues of ownership of land, especially land that falls, or forests fall within, and which actually are claimed by indigenous populations in Kenya. So we've done cases around that. We've done cases on independence of the judiciary. And this is about protecting the integrity of the process of electing judicial officers, and also protecting the appointments to the Judicial Service Commission, because they are also the ones who are responsible to protect the independence of the judiciary, and also independence of judicial, not judicial commission, but of other independent commissions like the National Land Commission, because also those are commissions that carry out integral work within the checks and balances formula we have under our constitution. And they have had to deal with a lot of issues within these 10 years, now 9 years, we've had our constitution with issues of financial independence, decisional independence, and so we've done quite a number of notable litigation around those issues.
I see its growth, the root cause of its growth is basically the niche. Because when you're forming an organization, you have to have a clear niche of what you're going to do. And if that niche is popular with civil society groups and with the people, and you convince them that this is important, you get that support. And I think that was Yash's genius of basically projecting into the future and knowing that this constitution will create forces that would want to claw back, the gains that we made in a progressive constitution. And not only that, convince the donors and convince civil society groups and the Kenyan people that this was the way to go. So its popularity will keep on growing as we try to look for now local funding, which I think is important. I see its work as being eternal, in my view, because you won't have. We're not going to see the end of constitution-making processes in this country in the near future, because as I've already flagged one thing, the youth, your generation is going to say we were not involved. We need a constitution that takes care of this and that, all right? And what Katiba will do is, as I've said, is to make sure that we consolidate the gains we have made, and we rescue the weaknesses through these other processes that are coming to say, okay, there's a weakness here.
So one of the things we debated a lot at the very early stages is whether Katiba Institute was, we were setting up an institution that we thought would be there for the long haul, or we were setting an institution that would be there for as long as it's needed. And I think we settled on we are setting an institution that will just be there as long as it's needed. And that's fundamental, because the logic of the setting up and maintaining of the institution or the institute is not based on an orientation of perpetuity. There is an acknowledgement that, for example, if things were to work out very well, the constitution is implemented well, there is not much need for Katiba. Other institution comes up, so whether it's on issues that Katiba does very well, public interest litigation, other institutions comes up who are doing that much better, maybe because they're doing it from a fairly sectoral approach. The judiciary is fully capacitated and has significant independence. I'm not sure that this is not an institute that would say we've achieved what we were set up to do and we'll close shop. And I think there are enough people here who are courageous enough to do that. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know. Whether it will happen in the next 10 years, I doubt. I wish it could, because then it would have meant that as a country we've moved very far. But given the political mindset of the leadership we seem to keep giving ourselves as a country, it's very unlikely that constitutional battles will not continue to be fought, and that institutes like Katiba, not necessarily Katiba, but institutes like Katiba will always have space and legitimacy to continue to exist and to add value to those battles.
There is one thing we usually joke about in Katiba is that you come here and get infected with this kind of passion for the work we do here, which inspires a lot of devotion. And so we have been looking at them and their vision and trying to actualize that through the work that we're doing. And so for me, as I would say, I've grown tremendously, not only as an individual, but also as a professional and as a human rights advocate through their mentorship. And through Yash is a very humble, affable person who's always ready and willing to share his knowledge, compassionate to the sufferings of others, and passionate not only about human rights and democracy, but passionate about Kenya and the potential that Kenya has as a country and for its people. And so, that's sort of inspires you to try and support initiatives and things he's doing to actualize that dream.
I don't think that all of us who joined Katiba at one point or another came with this understanding that this is the culture. We found a culture it made sense to us, it's worked out for us, and we bought into it. And I think that's something that internally we really have to give credit to Yash and Jill specifically, but also the board.
If it's the young people who are saying this constitution does not work for us because of ABC, I would support that movement because they were not there when it was made. But you cannot have these barons who have been playing games with the constitution from, the 70s, now coming and saying, oh, we need to change it. It's your generation that should be raising those issues and not them. And that's basically my position.
Professor, mine and yours was a small or a short stint, but I can tell you for a fact it's the reason that we are and I am who I am today.
And Professor Yash, I think you have been an inspiration all through. That the struggle is never really won. It is a continuous, and that's why the saying "aluta continua." And therefore, your resilience and persistence is really admirable.
The greatest gift we can give Professor Ghai and Professor Jill is to uphold the principles that he has defended for all his life.